So I have a question in terms of what we were talking about last week and the imagery exercise that we did in terms of contemplating your best self and in your preferred future. Do you have any questions about that exercise?
I had fun with it. That's not a question.
Uh-huh.
That's not a question, but it's fun.
Uh-huh. Well, here's, if anyone does have a question, I'd be more than happy to talk individually, privately with any of you, and particularly around the issue of core purpose, that's in helping you work on that. I'd be quite happy to do that. Just send me an email and we can set up a time to talk if you have any questions about that. What I'd want to do tonight is talk about self-image. And basically the self-image is how you see yourself. That is, and you think about it, it's self-image by and large for most people is really the picture that we have inside of ourselves, of ourselves. How do we see ourselves? And the guy who taught me all of this, he was, one day he was working with a bunch of psychologists and they all said, well, self-image is really, really important. And he said, okay, if self-image is really important, what happens if it's not a good self-image? And they said, oh, that's really, really bad. And he said, oh, okay, so help me have a good one. And they didn't know what to do. Now, it could be, for example, well, you could just paint yourself a nice big fat delusion. And that wouldn't really be helpful. So the exercise we're going to do tonight, we're going to work on your self-image. And as we're going through the different steps, I want you to basically check in with yourself. And when you perceive your self-image, to check it to make sure that it is, it feels authentic and genuine. And I would also say robust, in the sense that it can take in input, and you know, someone might say something like, you're an idiot. And if you've got a healthy self-image that's robust, you could pause and say, have I just done something idiotic? And be able to process that as information, and you'd be free to reject it if you didn't think it was right. Rather than have yourself go into a space where it's like, and have a meltdown. And you know, I can think of times when I've been sitting in my office and I'm feeling pretty good about myself and life and what have you, and someone comes in and they can say a few things, and within like 2 minutes, they may leave and I'll just feel like I'm lower than the lowest and frustrated and and it's kind of like, where did I go? And particularly what's happened in those situations is our self-image has somehow disappeared, or the image that we have of ourselves at that point, based on what other people have said, is not something that we would esteem or value. And that leaves you really vulnerable to criticism and all that kind of stuff. So as we go through the steps, because we've got a whole bunch of steps tonight, just invite you to check in after each activity and to say, now, does my self-image feel more authentic? And the other word that I use is robust. So what I invite you to do is to go back and remember the exercise we did last week and thinking about yourself at your best and the image of yourself that came up. So if you were to think of like being in a movie theater where they have those archetypal posters where one big poster is like a whole, it's a scene from the movie that's like the archetypal scene. And so if you were to get that scene of you personally, and so this is you at your best, and you know it to be true because you've been this best at various times in your past. And as you look at the picture, first question I have is the picture in color or black and white? So I don't need to know what the content of your picture is, what you're doing or how you see it. So what I'm really interested in is the qualities of the picture. So for example, is the picture in black? Does anyone have a picture in their self-image in black and white? Just wave a hand, or doesn't appear to be. So here's an interesting little exercise, knowing you can always turn it back.
Joseph had a black and white, but it's.
Oh, you had a black and white. Okay, cool.
Because the photo is black and white.
Yep, that's cool. So Joseph, here's the thing, and actually you can all do it. Just take that self-image and check it out what it's like with Joseph, and make it black and white, and see what happens to your sense of self. Do you feel more authentic? Do you feel more robust? And while everyone else is doing it black and white, Joseph, take your black and white picture and color it. And just notice what happens when you color it. Does it seem more authentic and robust? Your sense of self. That's what I'm really curious. What happens to your sense of self? Is anyone aware of any difference, any change? So when you color it, Joseph, does that make it, what happens to your sense of self?
I prefer the black and white.
Okay, cool. Now, how about the rest of you? What happens when you make yours black and white?
Unmute, Kathy.
I have a great need to color it.
Yep.
Without a doubt.
For most people, by and large, most people will feel sort of a more robust sense of self when it's colored. Some people would report making it black and white sort of makes them feel almost two-dimensional. There are a couple of exceptions, though, that I've noticed. I can think of one person who was a devotee of Ansel Adams photography. That's basically what he loved to do, was do black and white photography, and there was no way he was going to do anything with color. And he really had a good sense for shade and black and white. The other time, I was working with a person, and she was dealing with a bully. And I knew quite a bit about this person, and I've done this kind of work with her before, and she's quite colorful, and her self-image would typically be colored. And so she was dealing with this bully, and I said, okay, so just have a sense of yourself. And she says, oh, well, I'm the picture is in black and white. Now, I know that most of the time people will feel more energetic and empowered when it's in color. So I suggested she color it, and she couldn't. And the reason, it dawned on me after she just really couldn't. Every time she tried to color it, it would just go back to being black and white. And what I realized, and this would be something to ponder, Joseph, is having it black and white, context driven. And the reason I say that is because it dawned on me was this lady was dealing with a bully. And when you're dealing, it was on her church board, and this bully, when you're dealing with a bully like that, you have to be black and white. It's sort of an either or situation. If you continue to behave like this, I'm going to ask you to leave. And there's no negotiation. There's no conversation at that point. She really had to be black and white. So it could be a certain context where you're in, Joseph, where being black and white, quite definite, may be really important. There may be other times when it might be helpful to have your self-image in color, or even you could check it out. And again, this is just trial and error to see what the differences are. But I think of yourself, get a picture of you cooking, really being in your zone cooking. Are you black and white when you cook, or are you colorful?
Quite colorful.
Uh-huh. So just tag that in your experience, and just know when you need to be black and white and when you need to be colored, in that sense of your self-image. And the important thing when you're doing these kinds of exercises is to really trust your own inner wisdom. Your unconscious mind is creating these images, and there's an incredible amount of wisdom in how you do that, and to really trust that inner wisdom. So the next thing to do is you can play around also with the saturation of the color. Some people may prefer to have it sort of pastel. Others may prefer to have it deeply saturated, like sort of an oil or acrylic paint. Some may even like to have it textured, almost three-dimensional. And just play around with those things, those qualities, till you feel your most robust and sort of reliable, genuine sense of self. Now, the next step in this process is to get the corner of the picture that you've got in your mind, and like you do with pictures in your computer, click on the corner of it and drag it and make it just a little bit bigger. And notice what happens to your sense of self. So I'm curious, what happens when you make your self-image just a little bit bigger? Does it change your sense of self?
I like it either way.
Okay.
I was thinking that making it bigger, it brings it closer to you and probably increases your importance or your self-image.
Uh-huh. For many people, Jerry, that's very true. What you can keep doing is keep making it bigger and notice what happens.
Probably gets too big.
I was going to say, it's not comfortable to get too big.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of wild, isn't it, Kathy, how suddenly it's like, nah, that's not right.
Yes, uh-huh.
It's really interesting. So here's what, and you can do the opposite as well. Just make it a little bit smaller than what it was originally.
I don't want to go there.
Okay.
I don't. Mm-mm.
Uh-huh. Because now here's the interesting thing. Play around with the size of it until it feels the most authentic and reliable and robust, sort of assured. And if you notice that new position that you've got, the adjusted position, is slightly bigger, I would actually say to you that I think you think too small of yourself or too little of yourself. And I would say the vast majority of people that I've worked with typically don't think, in a sense, as well of themselves as I think that they are entitled to or should do. And if they make their self-image just a little bit bigger, they typically will feel more authentic and genuine. So I would also say, though, that a couple of people, when they make it smaller, they actually feel a whole lot better, almost like a relief. And in those cases, what I've experienced is it's possible that they think too much of themselves, but by and large, that hasn't been so much the issue. What's been the issue is that they have been trying to live up to somebody else's ideal. That somebody has a picture of them, it's kind of like, you can do whatever you want, you're the greatest kind of thing. And they've been living up to this ideal that they really aren't. And so it's almost like a relief when they can say, I'm not that big, I don't have to be that great, I can just be myself. And so we want to optimize your self-image for size. And again, when you figure out what the size is, and now I'm using quite a bit of computer imagery to sort of explain what we're doing. And what the reason computers can do all these things that we like drag on the corner of a picture and all of that, the reason they can do that is because we've been doing that in our minds for centuries. We've been picturing things, changing the color of things in our minds, changing the size of things, viewing things from different perspectives. That's something that we've been doing for years, centuries. And computers are only really catching up with what we can do, and that basically computers are being modeled on a lot of our abilities. So we've got size, color. So the next step is to get up close to the picture. And some of you may have been in, sometimes you can go into like a poster store where they sell all sorts of posters, and you'll see pictures of, say, like the Mona Lisa or something. And when you get up really close to it, you'll see that it's hundreds or actually thousands of little pictures that have all been put together to make the whole. It's almost like they've pixelated the picture, and each little pixel is a different picture. Or that's one way of thinking about the exercise we're going to do. Or you could think of it in terms of one of those older mosaics like you'll find in Italy and France and different places where the whole wall is made up of little wee tiles. And so you've got little elements. So what I invite you to do is to go back in your memory and just find all sorts of other pictures of times when you have been at your best, and use all of those little pictures almost like little tiles on a mosaic to make the picture of the whole. So you've got an archetypal picture of you at your best, and then you've populated it with all these little pictures. And if you want, you can even have little videos running as some of those pictures. It's just let your unconscious mind just go through all of your memories and populate this picture of yourself with thousands of little pictures of you at your best. And as more pictures come into your mind, you can just add them to the big picture. And having done that, just to take a step back, and as you check out what's happened with your sense of self. Does it feel more authentic and reliable, robust? Or does it feel worse? What do you notice when you've added all that detail to it? Or maybe I should ask the question, are we heading in the right direction?
It makes me feel better.
Uh-huh. So it gives you a more genuine, authentic sense of who you are.
Well, it's
Sort of more
like
robust.
your example. I mean, you said to think of the times when you felt your best. And so that negates times when you felt your worst. And it makes you feel pretty good.
Well, just hang with that, because we're going to come back to these other times when you really messed up. We're going to figure out how to transform those. That's part of sort of the self-forgiveness piece I was talking about on Sunday. We'll catch up with that. But for the time being, we're heading in the right direction. And what happens when you put in, say, some video clips and that even have sounds, and maybe sounds of you talking and being at your best? So Now we want to come and deal with Kathy's issue in terms of what we've done is created your ideal self-image. This is you at your best. It's an ideal because we all know that there have been times in our life when we have royally messed up and, in a sense, violated this best. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to go through your memory, and you clearly do this in the privacy of your own mind. I want you to find the worst mess up that you've ever done, biggest screw up. The reason we'll take on the big one is if you can figure out the big one, the smaller mess ups will just fall into line. They'll know what to do. So first thing we need to do is when you get a memory of you at your worst, messing up royally, how are you representing that in consciousness? And what I mean by that is you're working before with a picture of you at your best, and many people, when they have really messed up, they won't necessarily have a picture of themselves screwing up. What they'll have is maybe an auditory memory, or it could even be like sort of a physiologic memory. It's like just a big ball of ugh in the pit of their belly or something. And so I want you to think, how do you represent messing up? And some of you will have a picture, and if you have a picture, just bear with us. But I want to, for example, when I first did this exercise, I didn't have a picture of me messing up. What I had, the memory I had, was hearing in my ears that I was the most unhelpful piece of shit that this woman had ever had the misfortune to encounter. And if you, in some of my email a couple of weeks or a week ago, I said that part of my purpose is to be helpful, and she did not find me helpful at all. And she was pretty clear in her expression. And so that's how I resent. So that's what I was hearing, literally in my head. I didn't see a picture. I just heard her voice telling me how useless I was. Pretty graphic detail. Some of you may just have like a big, as I said, a big ball of ugh. It's kind of like, it just feels sick. It's just like, so the first thing to do, if you're in that one of those categories where you've just got a big ball of ugh, or you're hearing this memory rather than seeing it, because our visual sense is actually our strongest for most people, I'm going to invite you to convert the sound or the feeling that you have, the ball of ugh, into a visual picture. So like the big ball of ugh could become like a big ball of green, yellow, just sort of a big blob of it. You can get a big blob of it, or whatever works for you. Just figure out what that feeling, and so you take it out of your gut or wherever that feeling is and just see it as a visual representation. And what I did, for example, with this woman screaming at me, and this is how it gets really kind of crazy and wild, is for some reason I always took it out of my right ear, not out of my left, but it was like I was hearing her in my right ear. Took it out, brought it round, and instead of hearing it, now what I did was see it. And I could see her mouthing off at me. I wasn't hearing it, I was just seeing. And it was almost like sort of a goldfish in a goldfish bowl. Like just see the mouth sort of mouthing at me. So whatever way works for you, So we all now would have a visual representation of messing up. So the next question is, and this is big part of it, is we really don't want to forget these experiences. Because if you forget this experience, you're going to have to go out and do it all over again, just to prove to yourself it wasn't smart to do it in the first place. And when we learn the lesson that it has to teach us, that then can become a resource for us. So what we do is look at that situation where we really messed up and say, if I was to encounter a similar situation again, what would I do differently? And figure out what you would do differently. And when you've figured that out, what you would do differently, and so I look at that situation, she called me really unhelpful, and being helpful is a big part of my core purpose. I realized I had let her down big time because I promised her more than I could actually deliver. She was a person in all sorts of distress, and I, in some ways, wanted to save her from all the pain and misery she was in. And so I promised her more than I could actually deliver. So I really did let her down. And so I could see myself in the future being really clear when I'm offering assistance to make sure that I know what I can do and not to promise more than I could actually deliver. So go back to your situation, figure out what you did wrong, but don't just stay there. Let that experience teach you what to do differently next time. And once you've got that in mind, just imagine sometime in the future and create a little movie with you, the lead actor in the movie, where in the future you are doing this new thing. And just play that through a couple of times so that you've got a movie that's been inspired as a learning from this time when you really messed up. You practice that through a couple of times. And add that little movie to the picture of you at your best. So we're adding some future behaviors that you would want to do to that picture of you at your best. And you could actually add 3 or 4, as many as you want, examples. And just add them to your sense of being at your best. And now the last thing we want to do is archive the visual representation of you messing up. And typically the way we don't want to delete it, as I said, because then we'd have to go out and do it all over again. And actually, my experience is your inner wisdom wouldn't let you delete it. Over and over again, I've found that your inner wisdom is highly oriented toward you learning, and it won't let you waste any of these miserable experiences. But now that you've learned the lesson that it has to teach you, we want to archive that memory. And typically to archive it, we want to do all the things that sort of takes the energy out of the memory. So when I archive a memory, I would make it really small, almost like a thumbnail sketch. And I would wash out all the color. And for some reason, when I archive them, I turn them into those old sepia toned kind of photos that I remember. When I went through my mother's photos when she was a little girl, there was all these sepia tone photos from way, way, way back. So when I archive a memory, typically I'll make it very small, and I'll make it sepia toned. And when I've shrunk it all the way down, we're going to add that little thumbnail to as sort of one of the tiles or one of the pictures of you at your best. And just let your inner wisdom help you figure out where on the picture of you at your best do you want to put this archived memory. For many of you, it's likely to be in the lower left-hand quadrant of your picture. The one place you wouldn't want to put it is kind of like directly out ahead of you, because then wherever you go, you'd be heading to messing up. So want to put it off to one side. Typically. And now what we're going to do is use that little picture to almost like an icon on your desktop. So imagine you're bipping down along the road of life and you come across a situation that is very similar to that time when you messed up. And what you can do is just click the little archived memory and just watch it open and launch the video of you doing what you learned out of that experience. So just make that connection. Imagine bipping along the road of life and you come across a situation very similar. You go, I remember this one. And you click that little icon on your desktop and it launches you doing the new behavior. So now you've learned that strategy, just take a couple of minutes and just go through your memory, find other times when you've messed up and do the same thing. Make sure it's a picture, the way you represent messing up, it's a picture. And then ask the picture to help you learn a new thing to do if you were to confront that situation or a similar situation in the future. And just to create a video of you doing the new thing, learning. You create that video, add it to your picture of you at your best, and then archive the image of you messing up. Make it small, monochrome. And just let your inner wisdom help you figure out where on the self-image you want to put that. And having done that, now just check in and notice what's happened to your sense of self. Your self-image is basically what we've been working on. And does that feel more authentic, congruent, robust? Now that you've transformed and integrated the mess-ups into the totality of who you are? Or have we gone in the wrong direction? What do you reckon, folks?
There we go. I was saying it makes those things more of a learning experience rather than something negative.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And what does that do to your overall sense of yourself, Jerry?
Well, it's got to improve it. It says, oh, that wasn't, I mean, it was bad or whatever, but it's
right.
But I learned from it. So it improves it.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me is one of the reasons, it's like people will feel guilty about something, and you can tell them they're forgiven over and over and over again and what have you. And then you'll say, well, God's forgiven you. You need to forgive yourself. And you tell them that over and over and over again, and nothing happens. And they still feel miserable. And I would suggest that probably in all of those situations that I've worked with people in those situations, the big issue is they haven't stopped to learn what to do differently. And it's almost like their inner wisdom is not going to let them off the hook until they've figured out what to do differently next time. And the moment they learn that and practice it, just like we did tonight, all the guilt will disappear. Which, Joseph.
I actually was going to, I felt like I was wearing roomy pants. They weren't high waters. They weren't skin tight. They were roomy pants that were so comfy.
So it's like you're almost like really comfortable in your own skin and your own clothes. Mm-hmm. It's like cool.
Wearing like a nice pair of drawstring PJs, completely comfy. Tight.
Well, that suggests to me just having a sense of comfort in who you are, which is, if you think about that, that's actually a pretty good metaphor for self-acceptance. Yeah, it's also interesting because typically what we've done often would do is we would have it's like my best self here and then my mess up self way over here, And the further those images or experiences are from each other in consciousness, the bigger that difference will actually be, the bigger the difference that can happen. Like I remember I mentioned at the beginning, you can be quite happy doing your own thing in your zone, and then someone can come in and say a couple of words, you really messed that up, and it's like they leave, but you all seem to have disappeared as well. It's like, where did I go? And the measure of the difference between you at your best and this other mess up, I think has a lot to do with sort of the distance between these two memories. And what we've done in this exercise is bring them actually really closely together. So if someone comes in and says to you, boy, you really messed up, you can just look at them and say, yes, I did.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I learned. And basically say, and this is what I learned. And it was miserable, but that's become actually a very good learning experience from me. So in terms of dealing with criticism, that is actually a really helpful resource, so that it's not sort of an attack on who you are, but it's just commentary about a particular behavior. So what we've done tonight is figure out how to adjust our self-image. And my goal whenever I do that is to help people feel more authentic, more genuine, and more confident just in who they are. And when you're confident in who you are, to have that sense of awareness of whose you are. And so the last little step in this process, we'll end for tonight, is you have this self-image, and the last step is to become one with it. And there's two ways to do that. One of them is to reach out and sort of take that picture into yourself. The other way is to step into the picture and become one with it. Either way, the outcome will be the same, but one will probably feel more appropriate to you for whatever reason is true to you. So just allow yourself to become one with your self-image. And I wish you all a very blessed night, and that you can spend the evening enjoying yourself, God's creation, the one who made you. Have a great night, folks.
You too, Reverend Rob. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Jeff.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.